Let's have a read. Retail. Do about half a paragraph, we'll just kind of move around. So, looking at the model essay, explanation essay on Ingrid Clendenin. Go for it.
Ingrid Clendenin is one of Australia's most distinguished. So imagine if you said, I in the past, you know, when I was little, I wished I was an astronaut. Wished. Third part, present tense. I wish. I wish.
That's a wish.
I
Wish. That's better. Wish. Yeah, Indonesian speakers have trouble with that. Wish. What about you should go?
You should.
That's okay. Yeah, so at the beginning it's better. It's often harder at the end, isn't it? Should, that shh. Just try to put it at the end. Wish. And then we've got a cluster here, haven't we, with the past tense? Wished. Yeah, I wished I was an astronaut. And so then we just put it in this word, distinguished.
Distinguished.
Yes, and just put t on the end if you can get it.
Distinguished.
One for homework. Keep going. Mohammed, we're looking at that model essay. Alright, you got your copy, otherwise I do have spares if you need it. Keep going.
Okay, not only has her work on aspects
Yep.
Mayan cultures and the Holocaust been praised around the world, but also her idea of history has had a considerable impact on historical
Scholarship.
scholarship.
Yeah, that's one. I'm just not sure how to place that.
That's alright. Hang on, do that one for now.
Scholars.
Scholarship. Yeah.
As a serious historian, Clendenin emphasizes
That's it.
the significance of good history, keeps telling truth as her iron rule to research the past, and rejects any distorted
That's it.
history or single narrative history. She objects to teaching national values and puts forward that kind of history should be taught at school. Clendenin 2016. The exploration of the relationship between history and fiction in the history question, who owns the past, triggered another round of the history wars. As a public intellectual, Clendenin was appointed an officer of the Order of Australia in 2006, which a citation.
Good self-correction. Great.
That read.
Yeah. Good. That's great. Thank you, Lisa. Just a couple of things. Say relationship again.
Relationship.
Now that sh you've got very, very well there. That sh. Right? But in the simple word like she. That's better. She. Very important word, of course. You say it a lot. She. So it's that sh sound. You just got to be able to get it through. And relationship sounding really nice. Good. Just another one. Fiction. Fiction. Hi, Cindy. Come in. Cindy. This is Cindy, everybody. She's with us today. And this is everybody.
Good introduction.
Okay, yeah, so, and citation, nicely self-corrected. Okay, so we're learning about this person, they're a historian. Correct pronunciation, really. Historian. Historian. A person who really studies history, we met David Faber, remember, who gave the talk? He will say historian. So historians say historians, or the experts say historian, all right? Most other people say historian. So if you want to be really accurate, historian. Now, she explores this question of history and fiction. It triggered another round of the history wars. just a bit of cultural background. It may be important for your public intellectual. There's a general term called the culture wars. The culture wars are between the right and the left. They exist, that term is used about cultural fights, intellectual fights, not physical fights, in America and Australia. Interestingly, you don't really hear the term used elsewhere. It exists elsewhere, but the term is just used by those two countries. Now, our history war has been mainly about Aborigines. And someone doing Henry Reynolds, historian, because Henry Reynolds, I think I've mentioned, he is the most famous Aboriginal historian. And he wrote many books about warfare between whites and blacks from 1788 on. Now, have a think about it. What do you think the right wing say about that process of whites spreading out across Australia? Do you think they emphasise the war or the peacefulness of it? And what do you think the left tend to emphasise?
Right things that safe and peaceful.
That's right. The right even used the word settlement. Now, if you think about the word settle, what does settle mean? If you've got sand in water in a jar and you stir it up and then it settles.
Stable.
Yeah, it's stable, it's peaceful, isn't it? So the word settlement, here's politics and language. You choose a certain word, settlement, that has all sorts of connotations and implications. If you use the word invasion, it's very different, isn't it? Describing the same process. Who do you think would use the word invasion, the left or the right? The left. The left. Sure. About Europeans or the British.
Because the left remind the people.
That's right. The left are reminding the people of, you know, the pain and suffering of the indigenous people. They're anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, so they tend to emphasise the negative elements, right? Whereas the right, being more pro-imperialist, capitalist, whatever, tend to emphasise the stability, the peaceful nature of it, the fact that we've built this, you know, great nation, Australia, no nationalism, etc. Right? Okay, this is the history war. The history war reflects much more basic fundamental positions and assumptions about how you look at the world. So you get right-wing historians, like someone's doing Blaney, I think. I can't remember who's doing Blaney. He's more conservative. He was sort of very closely linked with John Howard. And you've got Henry Reynolds on the left, and you've got other people on the left. Robert Mann, partly on the right, partly on the left. But basically, when John Howard got in 1996, we saw the history wars develop. That's one aspect of the culture war. One other key aspect of the culture war in Australia was the war around education, and I've mentioned this before, that Kevin Donnelly, very conservative guy, appointed to review the Australian curriculum. The Australian curriculum has been designed mainly under Rudd and Gillard, more to the left, not that far left, but more to the left. The Australian curriculum, national curriculum for the first time, which is pretty good, because previously what a kid learned in Melbourne was different from what they learned in Adelaide, and the parents move, and kids have to kind of start again, you know. So having an Australian curriculum, good idea. The question is, there's a political struggle around what do you teach? Now, in the Australian curriculum, there are three main themes. What are they? They are environment, relationship to Asia, relationship with Indigenous people. Those themes run through whether you're teaching English or history, even sciences, those things. Because, you know, they are if you think about those three things, are they informed by a right-wing view or a relatively left-wing view? Relatively left, isn't it? You've got indigenous and environment really clear, and relationship with Asia, meaning, okay, we're not going to maintain this totally white British kind of cultural identity. We need to expand, become more globalised. We need to relate to our location in Asia. And it was Paul Keating in the Labor Party back in the late 80s and early 90s who really emphasised this a lot. That Australia is an Asian country, might have elements of European cultural history, but we need to reorient to Asia. Even just for economic efficiency, apart from anything else, but also because of multiculturalism. Okay, so there's the education curriculum, national curriculum. Every single subject is informed by these three elements. Tony Abbott gets in and he appoints Kevin Donnelly. I've mentioned this before just to remind you. Kevin Donnelly, very conservative guy who used to work with John Howard to review the English curriculum. And what's his name? Just forgot his name. Professor of Business in Queensland to review the history. Wind Shuttle. Professor of Business reviewing a history curriculum? What's going on? But anyway, you know, that reflects a certain politics, doesn't it? Get a business person to look at history. Okay. Tony Abbott was famous for appointing people who he knew they were quite far right with their politics, and they would produce a report with recommendations that he would like. And then he'd be able to say, well, look, that report says this, therefore the government's going to do it. That was a very transparent trick that he used more than many other prime ministers. So Donnelly produced a report, Wind Shuttle produced a report which said, change the Australian curriculum, emphasise the Christian nature, emphasise the British origin, emphasise nation building and nationalism. Very different values, totally different from these others. So here's the culture war, can you see, in education. So you've got culture wars around education and the history war here. So I'm trying to draw the broad landscape here because your public intellectual may or may not, depending on what their focus is, may fit into this framework, and it's something to think about and, you know, try to make it explicit in your writing about these people. If you can demonstrate political awareness of where people are in the landscape and how they relate to others, and, you know, if somebody criticises them, are they criticising them because they're right, you know, your person is right-wing and there's a criticism from the left, or are they left and they're being criticised from the right? That's all part of a mature, sophisticated kind of analysis of your person. You should try to demonstrate this to some degree. If you've got difficulties with it, you know, we're going to do the swapping and the exchanging ideas and clarification. So in that process, you can either get clarification from someone else or from me or whatever, if you're not clear on that. But hopefully through the course you're getting clear, if you weren't already, you're getting clearer on that sort of stuff. Yeah.
John,
Yeah.
Does it have grammar problem for she objects to teach?
She objects to teaching is correct. You object to, and then it has to be a noun. If I said, oh, I object to this argument, it's a noun, isn't it? It's a thing that you object to. So it's correct because it's the gerund form. You wouldn't say, she objects to teach. It wouldn't be grammatical.
Yes, I think we previously said after to, we have to have the...
Usually it makes the infinitive, doesn't it? To teach. Yeah. But this is different. That to is not part of the verb. It's more like this. She objects to. Think of objects to, that's the package. Because when you object, that verb, to, has to be connected. You can't say object of or object by. It's object to. So that to is attached to the object. And then you object to something. And it's the gerund teaching. Yeah. Good. So I hope that was a bit of broad clarification of this history war thing. Okay, can you just put phones on silent, please? Just people check. I'll check mine too. Good. Okay, the quote and the little paragraph there. Tell me.
For service to scholarship as a writer and historian addressing issues of fundamental concern to Australian society and for contributing to shaping public debate on conflicting contemporary issues. Parliament of New South Wales, 2006.
Good. Just one thing, contributing. Contribute, some people will say that. Some natives say it. I think if you look in Oxford, it's not correct. Contribute.
Contribute.
Yeah. However, the noun, contribution. So the noun has front stress. Yeah.
Contributing.
Yeah. Good. Keep going.
Clendenin has her own idea of history, which is essential for us to fully understand her. She believes in the practical usefulness of good history, both morally and politically. In her opinion, good history made of true stories is a direction and an aspiration for a nation, which will be vital to shape an understanding of the nation by viewing its own history, and helpful to consolidate. Yeah, just a general principle. Consolidate. 4 syllables, isn't it? Consolidate.
And the one, James, you were saying, what was your word? Considerable. 5 syllables. You know, anything over 3 syllables, I would just make a rule. Remember, I've talked about it sort of like an analogy of driving. It's like a little speed hump. So you're coming up to it, go slow, you know. Just stretch out the word and you'll get it much clearer. If later, after 6 months or a year, you just sort of naturally speed up, fine, but you would have practiced each section and got it nice and clear. Yeah? So at this stage, just a little bit slower with your multi-syllabic or polysyllabic words. Yeah.
Helpful to consolidate
That's
democracy
it. Really clear.
and political health. She notes that good history unconstrained by national boundaries has contributed to that widened quest for justice. She implies in her essay that manipulating, neglecting, or distorting the past, which is the bad history named by Clendenin, will ruin the future of the nation and even cause
Hypocrisy.
Hypocrisy of democracy.
Yeah, good rhyme there. Hypocrisy of democracy.
Hypocrisy of democracy.
I think that it generally this is very grammatical. That I think that's a bit unclear in his meaning. I don't know what hypocrisy of democracy actually means. I can't get my head around that idea. I think it means distortion or degeneration, or I'm really, there's a little fault there in the expression. I've got spare copies. If everybody got their own copy? Yep. All right. Good. Okay, so what we're doing, if you came in late, we're reading this because in a few minutes when we get probably the end of page 2, I'm going to turn it over to you and we'll do what we did before. What's happening in each paragraph? What's the structure? You know, what's the format of this kind of essay? But I'm also focusing, because we've done it previously, but it's good to revisit, just pronunciation as well. Just one thing, tell me, her. That's better, because it sounds a bit like her, you're going to get an sound. Her. Yeah, so in her opinion.
In her opinion.
Yeah, that's really clear. Good.
Excuse me, John.
Yes.
When the last sentence is cause hypocrisy of democracy. Hypocrisy
Yep.
of democracy. You mean even it's hard for you to get around its meaning?
Yeah. It's just not logical. You can't have hypocrisy of democracy. It doesn't make sense.
It seems he brought, or this person brought the exact expression or the words of the internet. Do you accept this?
Why do you say that the person's got the exact words?
Because I think maybe he didn't paraphrase or she didn't paraphrase it.
How do you know? So, if I mean, it's a serious claim. It could be the case.
You know what I
But
mean?
if somebody's cut and pasted it, that's what you're saying.
No,
then that's
not
a
cut and
plagiarism.
paste it. No, I don't say
No,
that.
no.
Because sometimes we cannot just make any other words for
Yeah.
the meaning.
Okay.
I mean, in that circumstance, we can
Yeah.
bring exactly not copy
Okay.
and paste.
Yeah.
Just that word.
Well, it is a cut and paste, but that's okay. You can cut and paste. You know, you can go blah 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 blah. Your words, blah blah. And as you cut and paste, all you need to do is put that around it, and that's okay. But remember, I've said there's a limit to that, like 5% of your essay, because 95% of it should be your words. The whole aim of an essay is to show a lecturer or somebody that you can explain complex ideas in your words, right?
Yeah.
So that is okay, and of course you've got to have a reference there, don't you?
Just for 3 words?
Yeah, sure. I wonder if she's done this elsewhere. Well, he's done it. Sure. You can have a very short quote. You can have a 1 word. You can take out 1 word if the person's using a special way and put quote marks around it. No problem. There's no minimum limit. There's a maximum in the sense of 5%. But that's not a problem. But I very much doubt whether that person has cut and pasted and done it, because the idea just doesn't make sense. It's like saying a chair of a floor. I mean, it's grammatical. A chair of a floor. You can have something that's grammatical, but in terms of what we call semantics, meaning, it doesn't make sense.
If there's a hypocrisy in democracy.
Yeah, but even that, like, what does that actually mean? It's just very
creating
vague.
hypocrisy in democracy, like it's ruining the.
Yeah, look, the person would have to then, if they do mean that, they'd have to explain it more because it's such a vague term.
Not just
So-
making it meaningful. You know?
Yeah, perhaps, but it would only gain meaning by further development. Anyway, we'll leave that point, but yeah. All right, Nancy, this idea.
This idea of history lays the foundations for constructing the research
Discipline. Again, schwa, not discipline.
Discipline.
Perfect.
Discipline.
Yeah.
And forming positions on
Some.
in some important issues.
Supporting.
Supporting self-determination
Yeah.
of Aboriginal communities is one of them.
Good. Yeah.
In 1999, the invitation to give the ABC Boer lectures triggered Inga Clendinden to start to research.
There should be an on in there. That's the first mistake I've noticed. Research on Aboriginal issues.
Research on Aboriginal issues. In Tues stories, history,
Politics.
Aboriginality, Clendinden
Yep.
argues that despite the
Settlers.
settlers having built a democratical nation and achieved egalitarian.
Right, that is a long word. Egalitarianism. Oh my god. I almost need more hands. 8 syllables. Egalitarianism.
Egalitarianism.
Yeah, beautiful.
Which
Basically means equality. Yeah.
which has expanded to include peoples from many different colors and cultures. Aboriginals are still excluded from
Oh my god, again.
egalitarianism.
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 It is, yeah.
Egalitarianism. It is further noted that Aborigines Aborigines have been suffering systematic injustice, which is inconsistent with democracy.
Mock has the stress. That's it. Cross out the article, the. Democracy. Think about article rules. It's democracy in general, isn't it? It's not the democracy in a particular country. So no, there's another small error. Yeah. Yeah, good. That's it. Just systematic. Yeah, just make sure you don't put a little schwa on the end. Systematica. You did it, I think, with politica or something. Yeah, it's just Chinese speakers sometimes, depending on where you're coming from, put a little on the end of plosives. Systematic. And don't let that little schwa at the end come out.
Even Japanese too. I saw this.
Yeah, because always we have consonant after vowel.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you always end with a vowel, don't you? Your words.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So it's hard. Yeah. Good. All right. Rolling on, Lynn. Clendinen. Yeah.
Attributes.
Attributes.
Attributes his fact. And this fact to the ignorance or denying of the past.
Yeah.
Past. She points out that Howard wanted a simple tap of the trump.
Triumph.
Triumph.
No, I'm sorry, the schwa at the end there was my emphasis. Triumph.
Triumph. Of
Anglo-Celts.
Anglo-Celts.
Clear what the Anglo-Celts are? Anglo-English. Celts were the people before the Angles, where we get the word English. I've mentioned this before. The Angles came from Denmark and invaded England. And they pushed out the Celts, or they mingled and mixed with them as well as pushing them out. So the English people are this mixture of Germanic and Celtish. So sometimes that culture is referred to as Anglo-Celtic culture or the Anglo-Celts. Yeah.
Over the deserts, an empty place.
Places.
Empty places.
Yeah.
Ignoring the
Mosaic.
of,
Pattern. Yeah.
of different peoples. We have always been ignoring our first people. From her point of view, the ignorance of the history gives rise to a government. Rise to a government more likely to intervene in the affairs in Aboriginal communities, which is the key reason why so many miserable people's
problems. Sometimes people are problems, it's true. Sometimes people are problems.
Concentrate on this. Often occur in Aboriginal communities. And Aboriginal communities are facing collapse. Yes.
Good eye.
I will dream of sea tonight.
All right, Dilhani, thanks.
This is evidenced, she believes, by the nation that British-based laws do not readily accommodate to the realities of Aboriginal historical experience. She suggests that Australia should embrace cultural difference, devolve the direct control of the federal government to those Aboriginal communities and carry on self-determination. Aboriginal people, she argues, whether remote or rural or urban, must handcraft their own solutions because the cures of their ills lie with the people themselves.
Good, thanks, James. Good reading.
Is it
No
wrong
problems there.
embrace cultural differences or difference?
You can say both. You can say both. Difference here, you regard it as like an abstract element, like an uncountable. That's okay. Nice collocation too. Embrace cultural difference. This writer, we're looking at it for the purpose of